My topic today is it too early to think about a con in 2029? The short answer is no. We should start thinking about a few things that the people and voters of Illinois will think about and that the moneyed political interest groups will get involved in. This is not about what longtime observers and participants like me might like to see changed in the Illinois government structure and in the Illinois Constitution. This is about the public discourse and the pressure groups. Article 14, Section 1B of the Illinois Constitution says, if the question of whether a convention should be called is not submitted during any 20-year period, the Secretary of State shall submit such question at the general election in the 20th year following the last submission. That means on November the 7th, 2028, no matter what, a call will be on the ballot. Why do we have an automatic call? Well, many states have this in order to circumvent the legislatures having the sole power to call a convention. Usually it's a 10-year period, 14-year period, or a 20-year period. Here's the Illinois history of this. The 1968 referendum, which gave us the last constitutional convention, was a fluke. The stars were aligned in a way unlikely to happen again, and the delegates at the 6th Illinois Constitutional Convention knew it. There was wide support for the convention among farm, industrial, business, and civic groups. Above all, the leader of the Democratic Party and its formidable machine was Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley, who was a longtime advocate of constitutional revision. He was, you may remember, the mayor. And there has been no one like him ever since. That political machine he had is now a shadow of its former self. At that time, the mayors, precinct captains, did the ground game that gave us a con in 1969, and make no doubt about that, believe me. The 1988 referendum was doomed. It was too soon after the convention. The proponents were Pat Quinn and the good government groups, including the Chicago Council of Lawyers. They primarily wanted a convention to have an appointive judges system and what they vaguely called ethics. But the voters didn't want a redo so soon after something that they were not yet used to. The 2008 referendum didn't carry a single county. Now, there was, as Linda mentioned, some maneuvering of a rather shady nature concerning the way that this was put on the ballot. I hold the General Assembly, the State Board of Elections, and the State Secretary of State responsible for this collectively. The ballot form was strange and misleading. There was litigation, but the judiciary did not want to get involved that close to the November referendum. But there was frankly very little support for a convention in the public. The movers and shakers didn't want to invest their money in a campaign. That was it. In both 1988 and 2008, the groups that had coalesced around a convention call in 1968 were pretty much opposed to a convention. I hope that whatever happens in 2028, there will be a nice, fair ballot. I want a nice, clean vote. Okay? Now, November the 7th, 2028 is the date of the next call referendum. Who will be the big movers and shakers? In an era of political operatives using computers and social media platforms in a way unknown in the past, who will hire the political organizations? Who is rich enough and interested enough? to do this. Probably the proponents will campaign on, quote, modernizing the Constitution for the 21st century, and that will be their slogan. They will tickle the public's attention with another phrase, tax relief. Illinoisans think that they are overtaxed, or that at least other Illinoisans are not paying their fair share. I pay my fair share and more. You do not pay your fair share. What would be the catchy issues in the campaign? Well, it's hard to predict this far out what the precise issues would be 5 years from now, when frankly I will be 85 years old, but frankly still kicking, thank you. But you can safely bet that the slogans about tax relief will absolutely be at the top of the list. First and foremost, as I say, tax relief. As Truman and Dirksen used to say, the motto is, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree. In other words, nobody wants to pay taxes, tax somebody else, somebody I don't know who's over there that I can't even see. Second, there will be some very emotional, take no prisoners, never compromise issues which are sure to arise in some fashion. First, abortion rights versus pro-life. I don't have to explain that to you. Ethics, always a vague term, is a good catchphrase, but the truth is Illinoisans really like corruption as long as it benefits them personally. Is everybody agreeing with me on that one? Okay, all right. A newspaper editor once told me about 20 years ago, when I asked why, if he was so opposed to corruption. Oh, Illinois is so corrupt. I said, you guys in the press used to print the major contributors and how much they were giving to the campaigns. He said, we don't do that anymore because our readers just don't care. Well, if the readers don't care who's contributing to the political campaigns, don't tell me his readers really are all that deeply interested in preventing corruption. Then there will be the issue of redistricting all sorts of legislative races. There will be term limits for elected officials. Those always come up. Public employees. Now, this is something we're all interested in. Pension rights, right out there. Right to join a union. We went through this last fall, remember? Bargaining, salaries, all of this from the State House down to school districts, police districts, fire districts, etc. Those public employee issues are going to be right out there. There's also, let me put it this way about the public employee issues. This is all part of what I call the great conversation. The great conversation about what government and public employees should be doing. Many people across the country, including here in Illinois, want to privatize almost everything. I don't have to describe any of that to you. You have seen all of this. They want to privatize the police. They want to privatize education. We've been through all of this. You understand what I'm talking about. Now, young Illinoisans, including my students at the law school, when I asked them what you would see in a new convention, and also, by the way, I talked to high school students and so forth, and here's what they say. They're interested in privacy and information technology developments. They are interested in environmental issues and climate change. They are interested in health care. Some of them say, I want a new Illinois Constitution to have a guaranteed right to health care. Okay. They are interested in education financing on all levels. And then there's the 16 and 17-year-old vote campaign. In 1968, 69, and then at the 1970 convention, there was a big issue about whether 18, 19, and 20-year-olds should vote. You remember at that time the voting age in Illinois was 21. It's now down to 18, thanks to the 26th Amendment. But I'm going to tell you, there's now a move to what we've already started, you know, about letting 17-and-a-half-year-olds vote in primaries. There's a movement called 16 Now, or whatever, I think that's the name of it. They want to have a 16 and 17-year-old vote straight out. I'm not making this up. I've talked with some of the people in the group. All right, so that's another, and young people are very interested in that. Now, but what should Illinoisans really, really be thinking about in the next 5 years? Answer: climate change and population changes. That's my view. First, Illinois is supposedly losing population, but it's really less than 1% a year. Okay, there are people moving out. By the way, there are also people moving in. Have you noticed? Okay. There are definitely some signs of projections of a reversal of what may have been only a 1% loss every 10 years. So there's population change. There is, for instance, a reduced fertility problem across North America and Western Europe. Nobody knows why. That means that there will be fewer people in schools from pre-kindergarten through graduate schools. Now, what does that do to the allocation of funding? What about jobs? The biggest growth in the job market is twofold. First of all, vocational skills training after high school, and second, the super high-tech areas such as artificial intelligence. AI is taking over, no doubt about it. Now, even members of the military tell me that warfare has become essentially cyber warfare. So they are looking for people in the military with superb high-tech credentials. Now, think what this is going to do to our concepts of allocation of resources for education and job training. Now I want to talk about climate change. Climate change specialists say that a marked change, perhaps a disaster of unknown proportions, is absolutely certain. Floods, droughts, fires, very high temperatures, very low temperatures, the likes of which we have never seen before. But the good news is that Illinois will be less affected than most places in North America. Not kidding. We have relatively moderate weather, believe it or not. I'm talking about comparison with some of the other states, all right? Above all, we have an abundant supply of fresh water in our rivers, and best of all, in our wonderful Lake Michigan. Now, the Romans called the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, our lake. I call Lake Michigan, which I was born within a mile of and live within a mile of still, okay? Mare Nostrum, or even Mare Meum, my own personal lake, okay? The 5 Great Lakes contain about 20% of the world's fresh water in the world. By the way, there is a treaty between Canada and the United States, along with the provinces and states that border the Great Lakes, and I really owe their existence to the Great Lakes. This treaty is called the Great Lakes Compact. Anybody ever heard of it? Good. Very well-educated group. Let me tell you. The Great Lakes Compact. Let's combine these two developments of population changes and climate change to see what we might be getting here. In fact, I think what we're sure to be getting. There are people who are climate refugees streaming across the world. About 60% of the refugees who descended upon Chicago in the past year are from Venezuela. Venezuela That poor country is rich in oil, but it has had a decade of droughts, and a government that, shall we say, seems to be incapable of addressing these critical issues in that country. When people are starving, they will get desperate. Make no doubt about it, okay? Now, let me put it this way. Maybe we can keep foreign refugees out. Maybe. But wait until the refugees from other states begin to arrive. All of those Illinoisans who thumbed their nose at us and moved to Florida, Arizona, Texas, and California will find themselves in difficult situations, perhaps even desperate situations. You heard about the temperatures in Tucson, Arizona last summer, 120 degrees? Think about that one. We can constitutionally keep out foreigners, but we can't keep out our fellow Americans. I personally intend to be a one-woman return committee to screen any Illinoisan who wants to come back, to see if I will let these people come back after all that they said about Illinois. You know, you've heard it. Okay. Finally, there are, of course, some other issues. Yes, population change, less climate change, and you notice they are intertwined. There are, when I say climate change, by the way, I mean the change attributed to greenhouse gases, not just, general climate changes. You have some other serious issues, mostly dealing with technology and with social justice, that we probably also should be thinking about. But those are the overwhelming ones. But I think that's enough for today. Okay? You're lucky. My classes are usually 90 minutes long, but I restrain myself. Yeah. Would you like a Q&A or not?
Yeah.
Oh,
thank you, Ann. Are there any questions of Ann?
I have one question, and that is, if there is a constitutional convention, and the provision that protects our pension is changed, what happens to those of us that are receiving the pension?
The question is, if there were a constitutional convention and they changed Article 13, Section 5 on public employee pensions, would it be retroactive for everybody? That is a very good question. The general rule is you cannot make substantive changes retroactively. So I would say that basically we'd end up with a kind of Tier 3. We've had Tier 1. By the way, I'm Tier 1, lucky me. And then there's Tier 2. I think we'd end up with a kind of a Tier 3. But by the way, that's going to be a very, very big fight over the public employee pension clause that may be submitted separately as much too controversial to be put into the proposed state constitution. That is a tradition in Illinois, to carve out very controversial standalone topics and put them separately to be voted upon by the voters. And frankly, I can't predict what the voters would say. So many people regard public employee pension rights, and then last November, the issue of public and private collective bargaining rights as essentially a matter of raising my taxes. How this happens, I don't know, but raising my taxes. Now, just my little speech. Obviously, I'm neither a fireman nor a police officer. I like having them around, don't you? Yes. And in Chicago, I know the fire off people, I know the police officer, I know a lot of law enforcement people. They're having an awful time getting people to apply for those jobs. And do I have to tell you about the problems of school districts opening with an insufficient number of elementary and secondary teachers? Fine. You want to get rid of public employees? You want to live with that? You know.
Thank you, Ann. I was just wondering, when did the prior Constitution come into effect? And were there any guarantees for benefits like we have now in?
Well, the 1970 Constitution became generally effective on July the 1st, 1971. And all new rights, and I would call Article 13, Section 5 a new right, became effective on January the 1st, 1972. The prior state constitutions really had nothing comparable to that. The provision that we all know about, the Pension Guarantee Clause, originated in New York in 1938 during the Depression, when firefighters, police officers, and teachers were being paid in scrip, you know, IOUs. And they said, we know you're not getting paid now, you got IOUs, but we guarantee you your pensions. And several states have gone with having a public pension clause. I am told that in other states it is one way that they keep and retain people in public service, quite frankly. And I think we'd have to think very seriously about this. Would it be a big issue? Yes, because quite frankly, I am still hearing people say the fact that public employees are getting pensions is the reason I pay such high taxes. I hear this. I'm not saying I say that. Don't look at me like you're looking at me. You're looking at me as if I came here on a broomstick. I did not. Okay. But that's going to be a very big issue, and I think we'd end up, short answer, with a kind of a tier 3 on a going forward basis. Nobody else. This is like, yeah.
Got one over here.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're concerned about the possibility of a conflict of interest. Do you see a rise in state money forces that would want to also force a conflict of interest?
I- I know. I do not know which moneyed political forces would be interested in the year 2028. Obviously, some people who've dealt with campaigns and financed campaigns in the recent past have indeed left the state. I don't know. You know, my problem is I can't predict what's going to be going on then. I don't know who would be there. Yes, there are public employee unions. I know quite a few people in that group. I don't know what anybody else would do. I no longer have as strong a set of connections with the business community that I did during CONCON. The business community and the Illinois Agricultural Association were staunch supporters of a CONCON back in 1968. Would they be willing to put out a campaign this time? Do you know how expensive it is to run a campaign with computers and with social media platforms? It's incredible what they would do. And it's not the way it was in 1968, where the civic groups would all get together and hold a press conference, and the head of the Republican Party, the head of the Democratic Party would all get together. Everybody would say, we all think it'd be wonderful to revise the Constitution for the good of the people of Illinois. That's not the way it is anymore. You have an incredible system of communication.
Good point.
Hi. Kent, isn't it? Yeah.
I wonder what's your feeling about two of the big that Mayor Daley wanted, which was home rule and electing judges. So it seemed to be really high on
Yeah.
the list. can we do good or bad in
It's
terms of?
interesting. What do I think about were big issues in 1970? Home rule and electing judges. Interesting. I'm so glad you asked that question. Home rule seems to be accepted. There are now 215 cities with home rule. Some of them are very small. About 8 cities have opted out of home rule. Boy, were they stupid. But they did it. Okay, so now they have no alternatives to raising property taxes. That, I think, is just generally accepted. And it certainly has made a difference, as you and I know, in the way the bills are arranged in Springfield, because Chicago no longer needs to come to Springfield for everything. Then it just can rearrange its own finances to a great extent. The judges issue has, in a very strange way, solved itself. We have an appointive judges system within an elective judges system. Have you noticed that? We have a lot of judges who start out as associate judges, which means they are circuit judges who are appointed by the elected circuit judges. And then a lot of judges start out, get their entry-level position through filling a vacancy. The Illinois Supreme Court fills vacancy in judgeships. Almost every week they have to fill a vacancy for whatever reason. So what you really see is a lot of people getting their positions through appointments, not through an out-and-out election. Yes, they have to stand for election 2 years later, and yes, they have to run for retention, but basically they get their foot in the door through an appointment process. Now, I saw this happening in the 1980s, and I co-wrote a column for this in the Chicago Sun-Times. And some people got very upset. They said, no, we have an elective system. I said, look at this. Look how so many people entered the system. And I'm not about to change it. I think the vast majority of Illinoisans who support an elective system for one reason or another now see that it's sort of a hybrid appointive elective system. Another thing I have to say is a lot of the people who wanted the merit selection system with the governor choosing from nominees nominated by a judicial nominating commission now have counted up the number of Illinois governors who've gone to prison. One delegate who was very strong for for governors appointing judges said to me, no, I don't want this anymore. Now, personally, I think what we've got now is the Illinois Supreme Court appointing so many judges, and quite frankly, that's okay with me. Is it okay with you? You don't, are you nodding or shaking?
No, I just, the only thing I worry about is when we get the big money in the Supreme Court races, and then, we've introduced a bunch of things into the mix about, how our Supreme Court is constituted when we have these very partisan ideological, expensive.
You're talking about the United States Supreme Court. I know our Illinois Supreme Court. They're better than that. Let me tell you. And I know these people. Come on.
Right now.
And frankly, I know them. And much of that is, somebody's idea of hype. What I can, one of the things that people don't realize is this has got to be the only state in the union where 5 of the 7 justices are women. Am I correct there? Have I got that right? You want to change that? Huh? You realize what would happen if you started? And 3 of them are African American. 1 of them from downstate, Decatur. You know what we're talking about here? You want to say, oh, well, I don't like the way they got elected? Just stop and think about this one for a moment, okay? By the way, one thing that's happened in my 48 years of teaching and 50-some years of being a lawyer is the extraordinary change in diversity in the legal profession and on the bench. We now see Hispanic judges. We see Arab American judges. We see women judges wearing a hijab. I'm not kidding you. We see Asian American judges, both men and women. Look at the pictures of the Illinois Supreme Court in the past. Look at the pictures of all of the judges, all of the benches. You'll see a marked shift. It's absolutely extraordinary. And that's going to be a problem. Somebody says, oh, they have to campaign and everything else. Yeah, sure they do. But the amazing thing is, quite often, it's not a very narrow race. It's quite overwhelming as to who gets elected, and frequently now it is either a woman or somebody from one of the, what do we call it, unrepresented groups.
As was mentioned, the same coalition, the same well-funded coalition that defeated the graduated income tax amendment pretty easily. I had farmers coming to me saying, I'm going to have to pay higher inheritance taxes because of this graduated income tax. It's not true. It's misinformation.
I have to confess something. I voted against the income tax amendment. Okay? I was the legal researcher for the Committee on Revenue and Finance. I thought it was a perfectly lousy amendment. It was very poorly drafted. I do not know who put that whole thing together for a number of reasons. And some of the con delegates who are still around who supported having the possibility of a graduated income tax at con also voted no. It was just very badly put together. And I'm sorry about the whole thing, but that's the way it happened, and it left itself open for what you just said, people saying, now I'm going to have to pay more money, and I'm going to have to pay more in taxes. You know how you get a new tax in Illinois? You get rid of an old tax at the same time. We got an income tax in Illinois by statute in 1969, just as the convention was about to meet. Does anybody remember? You should remember, Ken. What the tax was we got rid of at the same time? The ad valorem personal property tax, which was very heavy on businesses with factory equipment and on farmers with lots of farm equipment. Okay, and I won't go into that whole history. If you remember it, you know what I'm talking about. You have to get rid of an old tax. In the 1930s, we got the sales tax, which is technically called a retailer's occupation tax. And what did we get rid of with that? We got rid of the state tax on real property. So it's only a local real property tax in Illinois. You have to do them in 10. Did they do that with the income tax amendment? No. Okay? I have other speeches I can give. That's one of them.